Our moment of the week, brought to you by Omen by HP, comes to us from Detroit. For the fourth consecutive time, Team Liquid are LCS champions. But at the League of Legends World Championships, how much of a chance does this team have? Here to break it all down, Emily Rand joining us from Los Angeles. My name is Arda Ocal, and yes, Team Liquid doing very well in this particular region. What makes TL so dominant in North America, Emily?
So I actually didn't think they looked dominant in this series. I actually, after I believe it was game 3 or 4, I think it was 3, I was expecting C9 to take it. So I don't think they look particularly dominant in this series. I actually think they've looked a bit shakier than usual throughout summer. And I really think, so like, it's hard to say, hey, this team is going to do, so well at Worlds when we don't even know the groups or anything like that. I think what does make TL dominant in North America is just this roster that they've managed to assemble is just better than, what most other NA teams have, just in terms of the actual individual players. And so I think that sets them apart. I also think, until this summer, we saw them experimenting a little bit in spring, and then going into the summer, we saw them trying to experiment a little bit more. But I think as a general rule, they do, love to play through bot lane. They love to play through kind of a more traditional or standard style, which I think suits them really well. And I also think that's why, because if you have a style that you like to play that's easy to execute and you have an assembly of really good players, then you're going to do quite well for yourself. So I think that's why they've been winning in NA. I think that performance on the international stages is something else entirely. So I think we've seen TL be able to adapt and learn, like even just in this best of 5 in the finals, right? Like it looked like C9 was actually going to beat them, and they adjusted and adapted, and they were able to take the win. I think that their performance at MSI also shows that they can adapt and adjust while they're at an event and they're playing increasingly more difficult teams. So that's something to keep in mind for going to Worlds. It's really going to depend on how much practice and what type of practice they have going in, and also their group.
Well, then I'm just going to come out and say it. Knowing what you know, how much of a chance do you actually give TL at Worlds?
I think the weird thing about this World Championship that's shaping up to affect it in a way that we might not have seen before is the fact that it's looking like there are going to be 2 different boot camps prior to the World Championship. One where teams in Korea and China are going to be boot camping against each other, and then one in Europe where the European teams and the North American teams, and most likely the other minor region teams outside of Taiwan, the LMS, they're still a major region, sorry. Outside of the LMS, the teams that are going to be, most other minor regions will likely be boot camping in Europe. So I think what's going to end up happening is that you're going to have, and they've already said this in press conferences, 2 different kind of mini metas going into the World Championship, with the Chinese and South Korean teams, and then with the other teams boot camping in the West. So that's going to be really interesting. Traditionally at the World Championship, what we've seen from metas is that despite the fact that teams will be slightly more aggressive in scrims, they typically come to the world stage, and especially during the group stage, play a lot more passively than expected, default to more traditional styles of play. Obviously, that evolved at the last World Championship, where there was an insane focus on side lane pressure, which you saw from G2, who is now the best team in the world, Invictus Gaming, the eventual winners, focusing on pushing lanes, focusing on their side lanes. We're not sure how the meta is going to be at this World, so I think that is also something to take into consideration, that whatever TL learns from their boot camp will either be like really, really good, or will be countered by what we see the Chinese and South Korean teams coming up with. So I think that's really interesting. Honestly, I cannot say anything because it's really going to depend on their group. And even with the seeding that Riot has designed, I think we still see a lot of fluctuations in expected performance from seeding and what actually happens during groups. So I think that's also something to keep in mind. I can't honestly say whether TL will make it out of groups. I think if they can learn and adapt from stronger teams than them, if the more time they spend outside of North America, boot camping against strong teams in Europe, hopefully going up against the top South Korean and Chinese teams once they arrive for the World Championship, I think that can only benefit them in the long run.
Well, someone else that agrees with you in terms of can't really say where TL will go, especially out of groups, is the social media person who handles G2's account on Twitter, because they recently posted this. Quote, "Dear Team Liquid," tagging them, of course, "congratulations on winning the North American ARAM Championship and qualifying for Worlds. We can't wait to 3-0 you again. However, you'll have to make it out of groups first. Winking emoji, sincerely, G2. I think sincerely is the important part of that tweet there. But it would be very interesting to me if they are to be scrimming in this boot camp. Very likely that G2 and Team Liquid would see each other even before Worlds, especially with a tweet like that out there. What is it going to take for LCS to get more love on the global stage, Emily?
I mean, honestly, they need to work on a lot of fundamental things. It's not that I don't think that a team like, again, like a team like Team Liquid, a team like Cloud9, when they go and start performing against top teams from other regions, I think there's a lot they can learn. I think when you look at LCS, like top to bottom, there are still a lot of fundamental mistakes in the game that are being made that actually make it a bit more difficult to talk about them analytically, to be quite honest, like from my perspective, because you have to cover some more of the basics when you're talking about a lot of North American teams. That's where the joke about the ARAM championship comes from, is because, you know, if you don't know necessarily how to balance your side lane pressure, and you don't know how the minion waves are supposed to work, when you're supposed to crash, when you're supposed to freeze a wave, that affects the way you look at the map. And we see a lot of teams kind of defaulting to dancing around mid lane and, you know, maybe fighting each other, maybe not, maybe poking each other out, maybe not, trying to wait for a pick. And you know, that's like, it's become a joke, but it's also something rooted in you know, a fundamental flaw in a lot of North American teams and how they look at the game and how they approach the map. And so I think these teams, like the top North American teams, can learn and grow and become better. So the World Championship, like, again, can only be kind of a bonus for them due to what they're going to learn. And I don't think this is necessarily exclusive to North America. There are actually fundamental flaws across teams from all regions coming to Worlds. So it's going to be a really interesting tournament. I honestly hope this is a World Championship where people actually do try to put aside regional biases and nationalism and actually look at the play styles of the individual teams that do qualify, because, you know, just from North America, I think C9 and TL are very different teams in terms of how they want to play and how they look at the map. I think G2, who I still consider the best team in the world right now, is a very different team in terms of what they can do and their remarkable flexibility in their side lane focus. I think if a team like, for example, FPX, if they end up qualifying from China, I think they're a remarkably interesting team to look at, despite the fact that they play like one singular play style. Their execution of that play style is peerless compared to other teams that would want to execute in a similar way. So if there's one thing that I could stress, just like try to put aside your biases. I know it's difficult. I've made so many mistakes in the past in doing this as well, and really look at how the teams perform and how they want to play. So even if they're botching the execution, look at what they're drafting and how they would want to execute that and what their style would be.
Our very own Tyler Erzberger was in Detroit covering the LCS finals. Check out his work at espn.com/esports.